Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us virtually for this presentation. My name is Jensen Blahnik, and I'm a certified prosthetist, orthotist, and clinical specialist for naked prosthetics. Today, I'll be sharing a comprehensive look at NP devices as a company and how the functional devices that we have designed can help patients with partial hand and digit amputations return to work. Some of you may not know much about us yet, but we've been hard at work designing and developing these devices for almost 10 years. We're actually in the second generation of our original two body-driven devices. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you that decades worth of knowledge so that you can better understand this patient population, and that way it'll be easier to understand why we've intentionally designed these devices to meet their functional needs. I'll start by going over statistics on the etiology, prevalence, and functional impairments of this level of limb loss. We will then discuss successful outcomes of end users using these devices and the financial impact of traumatic injury. The content today is provided by Naked Prosthetics. We manufacture durable, custom, functional, partial hand and finger prostheses. Our mission is to support those with hand and finger amputations and positively impact lives with our prostheses. Our devices aim to restore the user's ability to perform daily tasks, support job retention, and encourage an active lifestyle. While NP Devices is strictly a vendor to certified prosthetist, we realize the incredible benefits of creating interactive and collaborative working and learning environments like this within the entire care team that cares for finger and partial hand patients with limb loss. According to literature published in 2008, based on data from 2005, there are approximately 1.6 million people in the United States living with limb loss. It's very likely that this number has increased with population growth since that time. Just over half of these amputations were due to dysvascular disease, and just under half is due to traumatic incidents. Of those traumatic amputations, 2/3 are at the digit level. This means that there are over 51,000 digit level amputations each year. When we look at upper extremity amputations as a whole, 92% are at the digit level, 94% if we include transmetacarpal amputations. Research shows that those with partial finger and hand amputations actually report experiencing more mental health concerns, more pain, and describe themselves as more debilitated than patients with more proximal levels of amputation. So now that we know how prevalent this level of limb loss is, who is most affected by these amputations? Well, commonly, these patients are working age men around ages 25 to 65 that are working in manual labor careers. These patients are typically healthy and they don't often have other comorbidities, in contrast to dysvascular patients. They're often working and providing income for their families when a traumatic amputation instantaneously disrupts their lives both physically and mentally. According to the literature, 75% of manual laborers can't return to the jobs they had after partial hand and digit amputation. And further, 26% of those people don't return to the workforce at all. So this is having a huge effect on the workforce as a whole. Anecdotally, we were hearing patients feeling this huge sense of debilitation, but their families and friends saw them as lucky they only lost a finger or two instead of their foot or their leg. This is likely because it's easy to dismiss this level of limb loss visually because it is a smaller amount of anatomy lost. But we wanted to find a better way to understand and quantify how these patients were affected. When we utilize the AMA guidelines for permanent impairment, we see that this small amount of anatomy makes up for a large amount of function. The American Medical Association guidelines is used as a gold standard, and it can be used to quantify functional impairment for all levels of limb loss. When we use these guidelines to quantify the effect on this one digit circled, we see that this digit is functionally 52% functionally impaired. This hand is 10% functionally impaired. The person's upper extremity is 9% impaired, and the person is 5% functionally impaired as a whole. So again, this is only taking into consideration that one digit circled. When we look at the hand as a whole and all the amputations on this hand, This person is 17% functionally impaired. So now that we have an understanding of the prevalence of this level of amputation and also how functionally impaired the people who have this level of limb loss are, what prosthetic solutions exist for them? The first is a cosmetic solution, also called passive restoration. So these prostheses are designed to look like fingers. They are passive devices, and so they do not actively move with patients. They are passive restoration. These can be very helpful in the grieving process that takes place after amputation. Unfortunately, according to the research, the psychological benefit decreases over time because a lot of these patients are looking for more function from their prosthetic devices. So there are other options available. Another option is a myoelectric prosthesis. A myoelectric prosthesis Myoelectric prostheses were created to provide more function for these patients. But unfortunately, there are some things to keep in mind with these types of devices. The environments where these devices can be used doesn't often match up with the environments where these patients need them to function. They're susceptible to heat, dirt, dust, water, and these are often environments where the patients were wanting to use these devices. There's also a training period involved because the muscles that were previously used to control the fingers are different muscles that are used to control these myoelectric devices. Unfortunately, no intervention is the most common solution, as these patients may have tried a different type of partial hand solution and found that it didn't meet their functional needs. This is also possibly due to a lack of awareness of any prosthetic solutions available for this level of limb loss. And this is why NP Devices really wants to work to bring awareness to the functional impairments of this level of limb loss, as well as the prosthetic solutions available, because everyone has different functional needs. The next type of device is a body-driven device. And I would actually like to argue that this is probably the most prosthetically complex. And this is because our hands are, like I said, incredibly complex and difficult to replicate prosthetically. The first body-driven prosthesis for partial digits was patented back in 1901. So since then, it's taken advances in additive manufacturing, as well as other technical advances to be able to produce this level of mass customization to make this type of prosthesis available to these patients. Now, we are not the only provider of body-driven prostheses. There are other ones that exist. Here you can kind of see different ones. So like I said, we're certainly not the only company out there that makes body-driven prostheses for partial digit and hand amputees. Here's a couple of examples. It's important to note, though, that NP Devices is able to provide a line of products that focuses specifically on digit amputation, both partial and full. What really makes us unique are our optimized mechanisms. Because each of our devices is custom made, we're able to maximize both force output and range of motion for these devices. We utilize a 4-bar linkage system to kinematically couple the input of the patient's anatomy to the output of the devices. This allows the devices to accommodate for limitations in patient range of motion, and it also allows us to make these devices strong within the range of motion that most activities of daily living occur. Our hands and fingers are weakest at full extension and full flexion, and they're strongest between these two ranges. So we've capitalized on this by intentionally designing our devices to move within this range of a wide C grasp down to about the width of a hammer handle. Other devices on the market that allow for a large amount of flexion They tend to have challenges when it comes to lifting heavier objects, while naked prosthetics devices have the highest force output on the market. This comes from many years of research and development and understanding that a tight fist is not a functional grasp needed for activities of daily living. By limiting the flexion to that functional range, we're able to create a tremendous amount of strength in the areas where that is needed the most. You can see here, the gentleman on the left is lifting a dumbbell with just the tips of his devices. And the video in the center shows a patient lifting an almost full 5-gallon bucket of water, which is around 40 pounds of weight. So these devices are incredibly strong and functional for these patients. The first benefit of our optimized mechanisms is object manipulation. So this is one of the patients that utilizes these devices in Europe. On the left here, he's demonstrating how he uses utensils to eat without the help of any prostheses. So he is able to eat independently, but it's frustratingly difficult. And it requires a lot of compensation from the rest of his upper body. You can see how much he's overcompensating with his wrist, elbow, and shoulder to get his fork to his mouth. You can see right here how much that overcompensation would add up. On the right, he's getting to use his own custom MCP drivers. So this task is quicker, it's more efficient, and it also takes out that overcompensation from the rest of his upper body. So not only was his goal to be able to use utensils and use this to eat independently, but he wanted to be able to return back to work. And so with these devices, he was able to do just that. You can see here the natural grasp patterns that his devices has restored. Long-term hand health is a huge concern for patients with finger and partial hand limb loss. So he may have been able to do things without his devices, but at what cost to that long-term hand health? One of the most common questions we get is about if patients are able to understand the force they're putting through these devices. I think that comes from an understanding of myoelectric devices. And really, our devices have incredibly responsive grasp. We're often asked, like I said, if patients accidentally grab objects too tightly or accidentally hurt somebody when they go to shake their hand because they didn't realize the force they were putting through this. But because these devices are driven off the motion and movement of each patient's intact joint, it's much easier for them to understand the force that they are using when they're using these devices. And a great example of that is this video, because this patient is able to lightly pull the grapes off of this vine without squishing the fruit. Gives them a much better understanding of the responsiveness of this device. So now let's take a look at all of our body-driven devices. So we have 3 body-driven devices. These are all custom devices, and they're named based on the amputation level and the joint that drives the motion of the device. So like I said, they're custom designed. They're all water, dirt, dust, and heat resistant, and they're intended to bring function back for workers' job demands. So like I said, these are named after the intact joint that drives motion. So we have the PIP driver, the MCP driver, and the thumb driver. Let's start first with discussing the PIP driver. So PIP driver was designed for someone with an intact PIP joint with active flexion range of motion, and also an amputation through the middle or distal phalanx. The force output of this device is directly related to the strength that the PIP joint is able to input. So it's a 1-to-1 ratio. Because of its cage-like structure, it also provides protection for both the distal end and the residuum as a whole. This can be very beneficial for patients as well, because many partial digit amputations, these people report experiencing hypersensitivity in these digits. You know, even something as simple as putting in a light switch or reaching into a silverware drawer and digging for a spoon can be incredibly painful. And so this extra protection can be very beneficial as well. PIP driver was aggressively life cycle tested for about 3 years or 5 million cycles. These can be really beneficial for both fine motor skills, like I said, distal end protection, and power grasp. Here's a great video of a patient donning and using a device for different activities around the house. It gives you a clear idea of how patients can benefit from the use of this device. All right, so let's talk about Rudy. So here's a case study with Rudy. Rudy suffered an amputation at home while using a table saw. Woodworking is a passion of his, and unfortunately, this amputation happened during that activity. He was 51 years old, and he was working as a sales manager when this happened. So utilizing the AMA guidelines, you can quantify his level of impairment. So at his level of amputation, his digit is 70% impaired, his hand is 7% functionally impaired, his upper extremity is 6% functionally impaired, and as a whole, he's 4% functionally impaired. His goals for using this prosthetic device was important to consider. Goals are a huge part of the evaluation process. So taking a look at his goals, again, woodworking was a passion of his, and he wanted to be able to continue to do this. So while keeping in mind his goals as a sales manager, he needed to be able to type and write. He also had recreational goals of woodworking. So here on the left, we can see all the functional grasp patterns that Rudy was able to gain while using this device. We're very fortunate that we have outcome measures from Rudy's case to relay back to you. Outcome measures are incredibly important, and we really encourage any prosthetist providing these devices to record these outcome measures to get a better idea of how these patients can benefit from these devices. You can see here the quick dash score, his quick dash score, as well as his TAPES R score showed that he had functional and psychosocial benefits from using this type of prosthetic intervention. Evidence-based practice is such a key role in caring for these patients. Next up is MCP driver. MCP driver, again, it's named based on the intact joint that's driving the motion of the device. So this device is intended for patients with an intact MCP joint and an amputation through the first phalanx. The force output of this device is a little bit different than the PIP driver. And so that puts it at 2/3 of the input. It's about 9 to 12 pounds each fingertip for the average adult male. So to put that in perspective, lifting a cup of coffee requires about 1 pound each fingertip. So these are still incredibly strong devices. Because of the way it tracks intact motion, it really mimics natural hand motion to restore both precision and power grasps. The life expectancy, the service life of this device is about 3 years and is designed with a safety factor above and beyond the force that a patient can generate. Here you can see that natural hand motion I was just discussing. Again, these are all custom to the patient to be able to be adjustable and made just for them. Now let's look at a user testimonial from Michael. So Michael, you can see here, his level of amputation was at you can see here his active range of motion, as well as he wants to be able to return to work as a personal trainer. So he has several big goals to achieve. He was right hand dominant. His amputations are on R3, R4 through the proximal phalanx. This was because of a crush injury in 2016. So let's use the AMA guidelines to quantify functional impairment at this level of limb loss. So here we're not even taking into consideration his contracture on the pinky. We're just looking at digits 3 and 4. And his functional impairment on a whole is 19%. So Michael's goals As you saw earlier, his occupation was a personal trainer. And so his goals were a lot about getting back to work. And this was also his recreation. He wanted to be able to lift heavier objects, including dumbbells. This is working out in the gym, using different equipment at the gym, which has several different grasp radiuses, as well as catching balls. He has a couple of dogs at home, and he wanted to be able to throw tennis balls and play fetch with them. And he even found, as he kind of went along, that he also, including this personal training, he hadn't been able to prepare food, especially healthy food at home, like he had before. And so he ended up adding that goal in as well. So looking at that picture that we were just looking at before, you can still see it here. He was able to use dumbbells in the gym, kind of like that patient we were discussing earlier with the utensils, but at what cost to long-term hand health? You can see how much accommodation is needed to be made by his whole hand and able to hold these securely. But with his 2 MCP drivers, as well as the accommodations made with his occupational therapist, you can see how much easier he's able to hold this dumbbell. I really love seeing this too, because this is really a team effort, right? With using his MCP drivers, it's also really important for the width of the dumbbells to be accommodated with his occupational therapist. And so those 2 things together were hugely important for him. So here's another example. So using these suspension straps, you can just see how much he trusts these devices, being able to put all of his weight in through this. It was really exciting for him. He felt very confident in doing this activity. So here's a quote from him. Holding a knife always used to be nearly impossible. I always used to cook more often before amputation, but if I needed anything chopped, I would have to get someone else to do it. And so this video is pretty incredible because, like I said, he wanted to be able to cook more, but even knife skills he was a little bit unsure about. But here he's able to do this again. And being right hand dominant, he's able to use his right hand to cut. Very often you'll see in the prosthetics world of using upper extremity prostheses, that side isn't typically the dominant side. That typically becomes the support side, and then they have to use the opposite, the sound side, to do the cutting. And so it's really, really cool to see that he trusts and uses this device so precisely that he is able to cut with it. Next up is the thumb driver. Thumb driver is very similar. It's derivative off of the MCP driver, but it has some very unique differences. And that's because our thumbs are so unique. So the uniqueness in this device is that it tracks not only off of the MCP joint, but also off the CMC joint of the thumb. The thumb tip is a bit more subtle than the tip of the MCP driver, and this is just due to the functional grasps that thumbs utilize. So the thumb tip adjustment screw is helpful as well. It allows patients to manually adjust the preflexion and extension of the thumb tip as necessary for different grasp patterns. And this is a flathead adjustment screw, so the patient can adjust that part at home. So again, the subtle tip flexion is very intentional because it's the same way that an intact thumb would flex for many of activities of daily living. You can see how much functional benefit this patient has in all the different grasps, from ball all the way down to using that drill. It's really cool to see. So here's a video of Matt. Matt was one of the first end users to use all 3 body-driven devices at the same time. And so you can see how incredibly well these devices really work all together. He's got thumb driver, he has an MCP driver on his 2nd digit, and a PIP driver as well. So when Matt had his amputations, he was working as a cement mason. And after his amputation, he wanted to go back to work. He wanted to provide for his family. He had a young child, had a new baby, and so wanted to go back to work. Unfortunately, cement masonry really requires both, like you really need both of your upper extremities to be able to do this. You could see from that video we were just looking at how important that was. So unfortunately, when he went back to work originally, he ended up having a lot of overcompensation and a lot of pain where he wasn't able to work anymore. So this, not only was this affecting his workforce, but it had a tremendous psychological impact. Matt describes this as debilitating, demoralizing, and emasculating. And unfortunately, this is not unique to Matt. So his goals when he was looking at getting NP devices, he wanted to be able to return back to work. This was his first goal. He wanted to be able to provide for his family, but he also had these goals of helping to hold his child, to help, open baby food jars. And then he really wanted to be able to do buttons again. And so you can see this video he sent us right after he worked so hard as his occupational therapist to be able to do this, and was really proud of the independence he was able to gain back using these devices. He really credits using, these prosthetic tools to gaining his life back, gaining his independence. So once he got his devices, he was able to return to work. He currently owns his own business now. He's able to get back to dressing himself and helping with his child. So it's really interesting too to keep in mind. Like I said, we were talking about how important goals were for this process of patients getting these devices. Well, Matt's goals changed too. His first goals were originally to just be able to help at home and help with his child, help get dressed, independence, and then it went all the way to these big exciting goals of going back to work and owning his own business. So again, it's really incredible the impact that prosthetic solutions can have for patients with this level of limb loss. So now that we've discussed the body-driven devices that Naked Prosthetics manufactures, I also want to discuss our newest device, the grip lock finger. So this is our first metacarpal solution. So this device is not body-driven. It is a passive ratcheting prosthesis. It was designed for amputations at or just proximal to the MCP joint. So this is designed also specifically for digits 2 through 5. It would be attached to a custom socket that a certified prosthetist would manufacture. So again, this is a passive ratcheting device. It has multiple locking positions that can be controlled by a rack and pulse system. You can see here. So it's very robust and very light. It comes in, this is different than the body-driven devices as well. It comes in 6 different sizes. So it starts at just 25 grams in the smallest size, and it can suspend over 200 pounds in a flex position. This device was aggressively life cycle tested to over 300 cycles, which puts it at about 3 years of life. It's very easy maintenance with soap and water, and life can be extended by keeping the metal on metal parts well oiled with food safe mineral oil. So here is there's no one better to discuss how this works for them than someone who uses this device themselves. So before we let Oscar share his experience, I want to kind of give some background on his amputation. So he was 30 years old when he had his amputations, working as a press operator. So this amputation happened with the press machine, and it was his non-dominant hand. He had amputations at the transmetacarpal level through digits L2, 3, 4, and 5. His goals for prosthetic solutions were carrying heavy loads. He also wanted to be able to care for his baby, cut food, and he was hoping to be able to get back to playing guitar because guitar was very important to him. It was something he really loved to do. So let's take a look at his functional level of impairment. So following those AMA guidelines to quantify that amount of impairment, we find that Oscar has 32% of whole body functional impairment. Here, I said 32% of whole person functional impairment. So this is very significant. And I would like to let Oscar share his experience because there's no one better to share that than him.
I like to say I wear my prosthetic 3 to 4 hours a day, 7 days a week for sure, on a daily basis. The hours depend on how my hand feels. After a certain amount of hours, usually around 3.5 hours or 4, my hand gets a little tired, so I would have to take off the prosthetic to give it a little break between 10 to 20 minutes. I like to say that I use this prosthetic the most when I'm going out. Let's say going to buy stuff for the baby, such as formula, water bottles. Helps, having this grip, just putting the bag through, carrying it. I also use it for eating, obviously eat on a daily basis. Um, I hold my water bottles, get it into position, or just grab my napkins sideways or however I need to. But yeah. So something I wouldn't have accomplished without this prosthetic, and I give a lot of credit to the finger design. Reason being is that it's really similar to my finger length. Playing guitar, I have a guitar pick here. I used to be really good at guitar, right-handed, so I use these fingers to pick my threads. With these fingers, it's really easy to just grip and pick now. So I have the opportunity to try to relearn guitar lefty, with more time, and with the more time that passes, I'll be able to, try to relearn. Another thing that surprised me about this prosthetic is how easily adjustable it is. You could adjust it to however you like, or whatever you do throughout the day, or whatever I do throughout the day. For example, if I'm going to do laundry, I could just, set it up just about there, and just grab my laundry basket, head downstairs, do my laundry. Or if not, let's say I just picking up a glass or a water bottle, set it up to, inclined to have a little platform on the bottom, little squeeze right there, grab your water bottle and just drink away. So we got some, I guess you could call them release levers right there. Just push down, really simple. Let's say I'm drinking out of a glass of water. I adjust it this way personally. Look at that cup of water. Right there. Drink comfortably. Now let's say I want to play guitar. Typically just have the first one all the way closed and the rest of the three open. Grab my guitar pick, adjust it however I like, which usually is around there. Grab my guitar, lefty, so not that good at the moment, but time could change, right? And well, yeah, that's how I work my prosthetic. So I like to say I feel more comfort wearing the socket than not wearing anything. The reason being is because obviously without wearing anything, it's more noticeable that, hey, this guy's been through an injury, just probably people noticing stuff like that. But interesting thing about this socket, the other day I went to Target, and as I was checking out, one of the workers looks at me and says, "Hey man, nice glove." And I looked at him, kind of, wanted to start laughing, but I was like, you know what? Probably don't want to make him feel bad, but I was just like, "What do you mean glove?" And he looks again and he's like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." And I was like, "No, it's fine, it's fine." He's like, "I didn't know." He's like, "It looks like a glove." So just the fact that he says it looks like a glove, kind of made me feel like, happy for the fact that, like, hey, they're not focusing on, this guy's missing fingers or this is a prosthetic. They're more like, hey, he's wearing a glove for some odd reason in the summer. But yeah.
So grip lock finger was intended and made to wear in conjunction with our other body-driven devices. These are attached specifically to a partial hand socket, and they were intended for digits 2 through 5 use. So if the patient has a thumb or the use of a thumb driver, this is kind of how that could look for them to utilize this type of a device. They're intended to be worn together. So if you remember anything from today's presentation, I would love to really emphasize why we've designed the devices the way that we have. We've intended for them to be elegant. These are meant to be aesthetically pleasing. They weren't built to look like fingers, but they were intended to be beautiful wearable technology, just like a smartwatch would be. The different coatings allow for patients to really customize these so that they feel like it's a representation of them. They're incredibly intuitive. Almost all the videos that you've seen today is of these patients putting on the devices for the first time. Because they're driven by their intact anatomy, it's able for patients to be able to learn how to use them fairly quickly. They're all waterproof, dirt, heat, and chemical resistant, which can be very helpful for these patients who want to function in these types of environments, and they need this function in these environments. They were also designed to be incredibly strong. These patients need them to function in high levels, and so these devices are intended for that. And they're all also custom. Every person's amputation, every hand is so different, and so it's incredibly important that these devices are custom for them. One thing I want to include too is our new conductive tip. So now with the conductive tip, it couples with the body and allows the end users to interface with smartphones, tablets, and other touch-related systems with relative ease. So last, I want to touch on the financial impact of traumatic injury. We can do this through a sample scenario. So this was provided with help from a financial analyst through Vandergren Consulting. And so the idea was to compare the lost work and wages impact of someone over time. So we will do this with a scenario of an electrician. So these are the variables that will remain the same. So this electrician, the hourly wage is going to be $33 an hour, annually making $68,000, 640. So annual raise, taken into consideration, so this is low compared to inflation, but it's to give us an idea. So the annual raise about 2%, federal taxes 22%, state tax, we utilize the state of Kansas norms for this, and that state tax would be 6%, and health insurance would be annually $7,200. So in this first scenario, this is this electrician with no injury, financial forecasts for them over 20 years. So all of those, that scenario will remain the same. In this situation, the patient has no injury. Their gross income over 20 years is over $1.6 million, and their net income is just over $1 million. This is broken down here into the gross, retirement, how much they save for retirement, how much they paid in health insurance, state taxes, federal taxes, and the net wage brought home is over $1 million. Now let's compare that. So here's that highlighted there. So now let's compare that financial forecast over 20 years to an injury that leads to amputation at year 3. And this patient does not receive any therapy or prosthetic solutions. So like I said, the injury will be at year 3, and so they will not work for half the year. Then in years 4 and 5, they are unable to work just due to the injury to the amputation. In year 6, they return to work, partial hours, partial capacity. It's year 7 when they return back to full-time at an impaired capacity. Year 7, they're full-time and at their new full capacity, which here we're using the consideration of 70% of the uninjured worker. So again, this is taken into consideration. This patient did not receive any prosthetic intervention. They did not receive any therapeutic intervention to work on that. And this patient's gross income and net income changed significantly. Gross income changes to $920,000. Net income is $550,000. Retirement savings also is under half. So this is a significant difference for the same person, same scenario, other than the injury leading to amputation and no therapy or prosthetic solution. So let's take into consideration a third scenario. So the same electrician, all the same scenario details from before. So now the injury at year 3, no work for half the year. Year 4, they still are unable to work just due to recovery and progress. But year 5, so the difference here is this patient does receive therapy and does receive a prosthetic intervention to help them return to work. So in year 5, they return to work, partial hours, partial capacity, and getting used to their new device. In year 6, this patient returned full time to their new full capacity, which is approximately 90% of the uninjured workers. Even though this is, they are receiving a device to help them get back to work, it's still not, it's still after an injury. So keeping in mind that this patient did receive that prosthetic intervention and had therapy and returned to full time at their new capacity at year 6, this significantly affected their financial forecast over 20 years. So now this gross income moved up to 1.2 million and the net income was 770,000. So this is a significant difference for this patient. So we can kind of take a look here at those details. The gross income, 1.2 million, saved for retirement, 75,000, and net wage was $772,038. So let's look at this all three together in comparison. This is a great way to really visualize the differences. So we can see here in blue, you can see overall this financial forecast for this electrician. In green is where there was the patient did obtain prosthetic solution and did have therapeutic intervention. And the gray is where the patient had that same injury at the same time, but did not receive a device and did not receive any therapy. And so you can see here significant differences. This doesn't even take into all the considerations of psychological impacts like anxiety, frustration, depression, hopelessness. This can all be considered impactful with huge financial impact for these people. You can see here at the 9.5-year mark, an uninjured worker would be making about $80,000 a year. Injured worker without prosthetic care never reaches that $880,000. In the injured worker with prosthetic care and therapeutic intervention, they do achieve that by year 19. So, the possibility is there to reach that level, and that can be very hopeful. It's very encouraging to be able to see that with prosthetic solutions and therapeutic intervention, their financial forecast, it gets them closer to pre-injury financial forecast. So we know this population is out there in large numbers and they're vastly underserved prosthetically. So as Naked Prosthetics Devices, we're focusing our efforts towards getting these patients into prosthetic care by speaking to all parties involved in patient care for these patients with finger and partial hand limb loss. While we only provide these devices to prosthetists, again, we want all parties aware that there's a strong, functional, body-driven prosthetic solution available that can be hugely beneficial for these patients. So we're here to support prosthetists through this process. We're here for you. We have a clinical support team. We can set up video support through that process of evaluation through to delivery and any troubleshooting that would come up. We're definitely here to help at all steps of the way. One other thing that came up throughout this process and learning more about this patient population is, it's so important for patients with limb loss to connect with the community to help cope with both the physical and emotional toll in their lives. And we found that this did not really exist for people with partial finger or hand amputations. So we created a Facebook group to fill this void. NP Devices is intentionally very hands-off with this Facebook group. It's moderated by our ambassadors. It's not a place of business. It's a platform for amputees, caregivers, and industry professionals to share challenges and triumphs, tips and tricks, and photos to make each other smile. This is a great place to see words of encouragement. And I would actually encourage you to share this with anyone who may benefit from the interactions on this page. Here are some great examples of how this page is used by people to connect with others. And so it's really, again, it's not specifically for people who use NP devices either. You can see lots of different devices there, lots of different, some people don't wear devices at all, but it's a great place to connect with those with similar experiences, which is a huge part of this for these people. I really want to thank you for coming today. I really appreciate your time. And like I said, reach out to our education outreach team to learn more and to connect to someone near you. Thank you so much.